So we're moving on through the life now. Chapter 15, kind of like how the book progresses as we age. Now, chapter 15 is the middle adulthood. Between about the ages of 40 and 60, although um, just like there was the emerging adulthood for the previous chapters, which kind of changed when you actually entered adulthood. I mean, it's very likely these days that you don't actually enter adulthood until you're 30 in some cases, 40 for people. I'll try not to judge them. I was about to use some a little bit more difficult language for them. Because socially those people are generally seen as slackers or losers, or give them a whole bunch of different words. But the economy is encouraging in it, as we mentioned in discussion and in a few different posts. Um, it's not so dissimilar to what they have in other countries either. I mean, in another country, it's extremely common for a person to have to live with their family their entire lives. There's no way they can ever afford their own place because they're just not as rich as we are in America. So there's really nothing wrong with it. But this age is very similar in the fact that you're going to get past middle adulthood at different times in your life. Maybe you reach it before 40. Maybe you've actually achieved that point. You've started mastering something, and because really that's what it's all about. It's about the fact that you're no longer in the building part of your life. You're in the part of your life where you're no longer having to kind of claw your way up, and you're doing things. So for those people that go to college and get a doctorate and they're doctors by the time they're 30, they're probably going to hit middle adulthood at about then. They've already had their kids are growing or grown, um, and so they're going to hit it at different times. Not only that, but like we'll get into the physical changes and development in just a second. But there are some people, my father, for example, I would still consider he's in middle adulthood now, and he's 75 years old. See, the physical changes in development are what we see on the outside, and they're very easy to see. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of the cognitive development that's not going to change. Now, that doesn't mean my father is an immature individual. It's just, I mean, I'm about 40 now, and I was asking him a couple of months ago, I'm like, how does it feel? You're almost 75 years old, um, but you're in great shape. You don't have any health problems. You're um, stronger than I am. I mean, the guy's got arms like this. He's huge. Not that he works out. He's just so active and takes such good care of himself. So I'm like, what is it like? And he's like, and this was honestly some of the best advice I've ever gotten for aging. He's like, yeah, as long as I keep taking care of myself, I'm not old. The only old part about me is the guy looking at me in the mirror. Um, which is very true because he doesn't feel old. He doesn't think old. He thinks like he's 40 years old. It's just that when he looks in the mirror, there's this wrinkled guy looking back at him, and he thinks to himself, "This isn't me. This isn't what or who I am." So you have these physical changes, but they don't hit everybody all that badly. As a matter of fact, some people even age well. I mean, look at Sean Connery. The guy's aged great. Um, Now, some of the physical changes that you do have that are going to be more common than others, and like I said, these are completely statistical. They're not going to happen to everybody. Some people are going to happen to really badly. One of them is body weight, and we don't like to talk about this, which is why I'm going to talk about this, because as we mentioned, we like to try to have different body weights to be very accepted and blah, blah, blah. But in the meantime, we're in a lot of denial about them. And the reality is, body weight changes, especially in middle adulthood. I mentioned in early adulthood, around the age of 25, your metabolism really starts to change. Well, in middle adulthood, the exact same thing happens. As a matter of fact, they've found that in order to maintain your body weight, you actually have to decrease your calories every year for the rest of your life, to the point where you're just not eating that much when you're really old. And they call this the middle age spread. This is where the guys start to get a little pot bellied and a little bit more barrel chested, and the women they get fat deposits in different areas. It's less the belly, usually more the hips and the thighs. Um, and this is because they're eating the same as they were when they were 20. And in a lot of cases, like my father, for example, man's in great shape. He doesn't eat too much. He's very active, but he needs to eat less because his activity isn't ending up in muscle density because he's just not growing anymore. So we'll have to continue. And honestly, that's one of the reasons, psychologically speaking, diets don't work. For those that do want to lose weight, they don't need to go on a diet. They need to change their lives. They need to change who they are, which is the problem you see in middle adulthood. Because, like, you take me, for example. I am the weight I am. This didn't just happen to me. I mean, I'm in pretty decent shape. But I am this weight because of who I am, because of how I think, because of what I even want to do. If I were to go on a diet, I'm probably about 10 pounds overweight now, not bad for a guy who weighs almost 200 pounds. So if I were to go on a diet and change what I eat for a little bit, but I don't change who I am, then as soon as my diet is over, I will go back to being about 10 pounds overweight again. If I wanted to get skinny, I could go down to about 160 before I start to get really unhealthy. I mean, I'd lose most of my muscle mass, but I could do it. In order to do that, I would actually have to become a different person. And you'll notice this if you actually see real success stories in weight loss, like somebody who actually lost like 100 pounds or often even up to 50 pounds. You'll notice that what the people did was they actually changed their lives. They changed who they were. What was important to them, what they did on a daily basis. It wasn't a temporary change. And so in middle adulthood, you really have to do the same thing. It's like every year you have to change who you are a little bit, or else you're going to start to spread out. Another myth that people have is about shortening, that when they get old, they get shorter. Now, this it is true about the age of 50, you do start to lose bone density. And this can, by the time you're 60, can even result in the loss of about an inch. But they don't really shrink that much. Oddly enough, certain things can make you shrink more. Basically, the better you take care of yourself, the better your bone density is going to be, and the less you're going to shrink. If you drink alcohol a lot or you smoke, these things are going to make you shrink. They're going to decrease your muscle density. Essentially, your body is fighting poison on a daily basis. It just doesn't have enough energy to take care of you. More complicated things than that, but that's a basic of it. But it makes you wonder, because we like to look at development and I guess this is one of the few advantages of going over prenatal development in the beginning. We talk about the teratogens, different poisons or things that are negatively developmental. We think of teratogens as things like alcohol, but even the mother being very stressed is a teratogen. It impacts the development of the fetus negatively. But at the same time, we're now talking about these same two things that are a huge teratogen, both alcohol, which leads to fetal alcohol syndrome, and smoking, which leads to a bunch of babies with totally separate birth defects. And yet now we're talking about essentially teratogens as you age. By the time you're 40 to 60, these same two major teratogens affect your physical development still. And honestly, all the other teratogens do too. These don't just affect your physical and mental development at one point in your life. They do your whole life. Stress, going to affect you negatively. Poisons, going to affect you negatively. And these will stay with you for the rest of your life because it will hinder your development as a human. Now, one of the more interesting things here is we now start to get into some of the reproductive changes. Now, we all know about menopause. This is a very famous one. Everybody likes to talk about it. There are ways to delay menopause, by the way, and there are ways to speed it up. No, menopause, just as a brief definition, a human female only has so many eggs. Unlike males, that we just make sperm as we go, and I made one right now. Boop, there it is. I probably just made 1 million. But women don't do that. They have so many eggs in their ovaries, and they kind of release them once a month, and then once they're out of eggs, their body just kind of shuts down the reproductive system. And this has other chemical effects. You stop producing as much estrogen. Your ovaries actually shrink. They atrophy because they're not needed anymore. Why take up the space? And so this can have a lot of developmental and both physical, cognitive, and social effects. Some of the things that can speed up menopause is smoking. If you're a smoker, you will go through menopause earlier than if you're a non-smoker. If you have never had children, that will speed up menopause. And that's what the book says, but really you should look at it the other way around. You should look at it that if you have children, it delays menopause. Because first of all, that's kind of the natural order of things, is to have children. That's what we're designed to do. Not having children is an anomaly. So that's not really people speeding it up. It's just not doing what they were designed to do. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if you only have so many eggs and you know your body just kind of spits one out about once a month, during pregnancy you're not producing eggs anymore. You're not releasing the eggs, so they kind of get stored up. As a matter of fact, you don't have your period through most of breastfeeding. At least most women don't. And breastfeeding lasts approximately 2 years. So you're talking about around a 3-year period of not releasing those eggs every month. So to a point, every child you have could delay menopause between 1 and 3 years. So if you have 5 kids, theoretically you could be talking about like an additional 15 years of not going through menopause. And there are, of course, other biological systems in place, so it probably wouldn't stretch out to the full 15 years. But still, there are other things that we can do that will either speed up or slow down menopause. Now, figure 15.1 is kind of neat. It's talking about the reporting of hot flashes, because the fact is, we like to think of menopause as a completely biological agent, where, you know, your estrogen is drying up, and so you're going to go through these physical changes, and that's all fine and dandy. But yet at the same time, you take a symptom like hot flashes, like they talk about in figure 15.1. 15% of women in Japan report having hot flashes through menopause. 15%. You go to a country like Africa, or continent like Africa, we love to call it a country, about 83% of the women report having hot flashes. Obviously it's hotter there, but that's not what we're talking about here. So in the book they talk about this, like, well, we don't really know why. Maybe it's diet, because there's like a lot of soybeans and different types of non-fatty diets in Japan. Well, and that's true. But at the same time, China, which has a very similar diet to Japan, has 40%. It has over twice as many reports of hot flashes during menopause. Europe, Middle East, America have between 60 and 80%, with Africa really tipping over the board with around 83%. So it's hard to say that genetics are going to kick into effect, because, you know, Europe and North America have around the same genetics, and Japan and China has around the same genetics. So there's got to be other things involved as well. What about social factors, like acceptance of age? Some cultures are afraid of age. So, you know, menopause is going to just naturally have a lot more social drawbacks, the increased stress. All these is going to lead to increased side effects. Those who are going to accept being that it's okay to be old, you know, even in our own culture, black women have a much more accepting view of menopause, and so they're most likely going to have less side effects and less negative side effects of it. I'm sure there's a lot of other factors involved as well, but I don't want you to dismiss the social ones. Menopause comes with basically estrogen deficiency as kind of a standard operating procedure. And so there are certain traits of estrogen deficiency that you can get at any age. You can have estrogen deficiency at any age. Some of the traits are increased urinary tract infections, which can be very dangerous, by the way, over the age of 70. We'll probably get into next time. Urinary tract infections for really old people can actually kill them. For young people, it's just an annoyance, but it's a serious health concern when you're over 70. You can literally start to get dementia in the old folks' homes. If anybody's ever done CNA work, um, when the old people start to get really loopy, one of the first things they look for, especially in women, is urinary tract infections. Um, so with estrogen deficiency, you can get urinary tract infections, lack of interest in sex. We know about that one. Depressed mood, depression is a symptom. Lack of vaginal secretions, even when sexually aroused. Loss of concentration and getting irritable with other individuals. And some of these are symptoms we just don't hear about a lot. But let's not ignore men. Men have reproductive changes as well. Um, Interestingly enough, we're able to control them a lot more than women can. Essentially, by just sheer masturbation, gives us the solution to most of our problems. Yes, men, the solution is right in the palm of your hand. See, what happens is sexual activity keeps testosterone going. So it's actually a problem with some religions who say that masturbation is wrong or a sin. It actually hinders human development to not masturbate, especially as a man. Not only is it going to hinder social development, but as a man, as a fully formed adult man, if I'm not either getting sex or giving myself sex when no one else is around, I am going to have some problems. I'm going to have decreased testosterone. This can actually render me infertile. Um, as Elvis said, if you don't use the pipes get rusty. A little too tempting to throw in jokes here. You also get reproductive changes in partners themselves. And this is something there's a lot of misconceptions about. A lot of people think that once you're married, you've been married for a few years, the sex dies off. And we like to complain about it, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, most of this is just a fantasy, nostalgia and romanticism of your single years. I read an acronym the other day about the word single, and it was like stay inebriated nightly, get laid every day, or something like that. I forget exactly what it was. But that's actually how we think of it. We have this stupid nostalgia for things that never really happened. We're like, oh, music was so good when I was a teenager, but it sucks now. No, pretty much most of the music sucked when you were a teenager now as well. You just don't remember the sucky stuff. You just remember the good stuff. And it's the same with any other sort of nostalgia. And it's that sort of thing that makes us think that the sex dies off when you're older. It basically doesn't. The fact is, you don't have as much sex as you remember when you were a teenager or when you were in your early 20s. When you were single, you didn't get laid that much. Why? Because you had to go to the point of finding a partner, seducing a partner, having a convenient opportunity, and then you actually get to the having sex part. But with marital partners, you don't do that. As a matter of fact, you're in these, not only are all the problems solved, but you're going to bed in the same bed every time. It kind of invites itself. So sex doesn't actually dwindle. One of the few changes that does happen in reproductive changes is that it takes longer for both partners to reach orgasm. And it's less bad in women if the men actually have skill. That's one of the kind of jokes played on us by the universe is men get to achieve orgasm by having a female present, often just in the same room is enough. And women are a little bit more based on the skill of the man than on his mere existence. So if the man is skilled, then the woman's problems aren't quite so bad. But with men, we have a tendency in our dotage, so to speak, during this middle adulthood period, to take longer to orgasm. And honestly, this being one of the few effects of age, doesn't really get too many complaints. I actually heard somebody who's a little significantly older than myself. And I was asking him, one advantage of being a psychologist, I get to ask people about their sex lives and different aspects that they don't like to talk to other people about. And I'm like, how is your sex life at your age? And he's like, it's great. He's like, I thought it would be bad because it doesn't work like it used to. This was a man that I was talking to. It's like, it doesn't work like it used to. It's like, but ultimately, I just had to learn to arouse myself because I never needed to before. You know, it was like an on switch. You could just, whoop, there it was. And it's like, now it takes a little longer to be there, and I can actually enjoy sex more, because I'm having sex for longer. So in a lot of cases, at this age, the sex gets a lot better. We'll still foolishly romanticize the sex of our youth and think that that's better, but from all reports and evidence, it isn't. It actually gets better as you get older. Um, the last thing that I want to mention here is health problems that you get due to other psychological problems. I'll get into the cognitive problems next time. The fact is that really hostile individuals, aggressive, angry individuals, have more health problems once they get into this. You're talking about heart problems, a whole variety of problems. So, the idea here is, being a little bit more mellow is going to have some huge effects in the long run. So we'll get into the cognitive changes next time. Good luck.